Now it's my pleasure to introduce the Governor of Hawaii. I was telling him just now that I've introduced him more times in the last 2 months than the previous governor in the last 8 years before that. And that's because our governor is a real intellectual. He is originally from Buffalo, New York, so it's actually the opposite side of the country. He came to the University of Hawaii for his graduate studies. He has a PhD in American Studies. He could have been a very distinguished scholar, but instead he chose a political career, and he rose in that political career through the legislature in the state of Hawaii, serving in both the House and the Senate. He went to the U.S. Congress, served for many years with great distinction in the U.S. Congress, and then 2+ years ago he was elected as governor of the state of Hawaii. As a member of the Congress, he served in the Armed Services Committee, and so he's very familiar with the issues of Okinawa. He is known widely as a deep friend of Okinawa and the people of Okinawa and the Okinawan community here in Hawaii. During his first year, he visited Okinawa. I don't know how many governors they've seen in Okinawa in the last 10 years, but I suspect that, Neal, you have been the only one in the last few years. With great pleasure, I introduce the Governor of Hawaii, Neal Abercrombie.
Oh, good. I have my lion dog. Do I look like this? Thank you very much, Charles. You want me to open it up? Oh. They're going to try and sell you T-shirts in the back, so. There we go. Very nice. Thank you, Steve. Aloha. Aisai. Boy, what an enthusiastic audience this is. This is terrific. That's not the Okinawa I know. The Okinawa I know, everybody is enthusiastic, ready to go. Uchinanchu spirit, right, Steve? Well, I'm going to try and exhibit a little of the Aloha spirit for you this morning. You may wonder, aside from the institutional side of things, well, the governor of the state is here, and so would it be nice if he comes and gives what they always put down at the top of my list, brief remarks. Make sure, so you go through the motions. But actually, I was asked by the number 3, the Uchinanchu Talk Story number 3 folks, to speak a little bit, not to keynote as General Gregson will do, or to supplant the panel that will be addressing some of these some of the aspects of the question of U.S. military bases in Okinawa, but perhaps to set a context for you. President Morrison was kind enough to mention that I spent 2 decades on the Armed Services Committee in the United States House of Representatives, with a particular emphasis, at least from the point of view that I was trying to represent in the Congress, on the Asia-Pacific area. And I became very interested almost immediately in the whole issue of the occupation of Okinawa. I believe there'll be some discussion here about the war in the Pacific and its consequences, both for Japan and for even more particularly for Okinawa at the end of World War II, and the subsequent occupation by the United States Armed Forces, the establishment of a defense treaty between Japan and the United States, and then the issue of reversion, the whole question of the relationship between the government in Tokyo and Okinawa as a political entity, and then the subsequent history of the United States military in the context of political relations between Okinawa and the main islands, the rest of the islands of the nation of Japan, most particularly the government in Tokyo and the government in Okinawa. I recite that to you not because you don't know that, but because I've discovered in politics it's the obvious you need to speak of over and over again, because it's the obvious you tend to forget first or take most for granted. And one of the things that's been taken most for granted is that there is a continuing issue of military bases, U.S. military bases in Okinawa, and it is always being questioned and never answered. It is always in the process of being solved, but never resolved. And I think the time has come for the latter to become the watchword. I'm not here, nor are the rest of the folks who will be speaking to you today here to solve any issues, but we need to resolve it. That's what politics is about. You don't necessarily solve something once for all. Oh, there's a permanent answer. We can forget that, put that over here, and move on to something else. This will be an ongoing set of relationships and an ongoing set of questioning in terms of where do we go from here now that we have resolved the issue of the U.S. Military bases in Okinawa. Without giving you a too detailed or broad an analysis or extensive analysis of the whole question of the U.S. Defense Treaty with Japan post-World War II and the consequences that are before us today in terms of military bases in Japan, suffice to say that there is little argument, I think, about the fact that those troops, United States troops that are in Japan at the present time, are concentrated in Okinawa in terms of numbers and in terms of the political, economic, and social consequences of that the deployment of U.S. troops. If you say the word occupation, for example, it can have a negative or a pejorative meaning to it, depending on your political point of view. And I think that once the reversion took place, it's fair to say that the occupation ended, but the deployment of U.S. troops in Japan did not end, and more particularly, the concentration of these troops in Okinawa and in certain areas of Okinawa continued until this day. In some respects, what became clear to me very, very quickly was, especially in political terms, it wasn't the United States so much imposing itself on Okinawa in terms of the number of troops that were stationed there at various bases in Okinawa, but rather the United States military, and to some degree the United States State Department and political forces in terms of foreign policy, saw itself caught between the government in Tokyo and the government in Okinawa. That there were tensions and sometimes confrontations, political confrontations, not necessarily physical confrontations, although sometimes everything from sit-ins to demonstrations to political campaigns being run with being conducted with United States troops in Okinawa as being one of the principal focuses of those campaigns, particularly in Okinawa itself, but even the national elections in Japan as a whole could not and have not been able to avoid the question of United States troops in Okinawa playing a central role in many instances or in some instances to the exclusion of other political factors in the relationships between the government of Japan and the United States. This manifested itself in with the idea that, well, could we, and you're going to have a panel on this a little bit later, could the United States troops be stationed elsewhere from where they were in Okinawa itself? Could they be stationed elsewhere in Japan? Should they be stationed there at all under the present circumstances as they've evolved, particularly in relation to Korea, China, and the rest of Asia and South Asia? So we find ourselves in a continuing dialogue over more than, well, really since reversion, but more particularly over the past 23 years now or so, the past 2 decades. Well, there's going to be a shift of Marine forces in Okinawa somewhere, and probably outside of Okinawa itself now. This was agreed to by the government of Japan, certainly the political forces in Okinawa and the United States, except after that it went into a kind of somnambulance. It went into a kind of suspended animation. Went into a looping dialogue in which the same things are said over and over again by the same, sometimes the same people, and other times it's new faces, but they're saying the same thing. That somehow this is going to have to be resolved and acted upon, and it never takes place. I think principally it has not happened to this point because from the United States point of view, and I'm going to concentrate on that for a couple of minutes. From the United States point of view, the average member of Congress, not because they're ignorant or because they are even disinterested, but because of the press of all other kinds of political activity in their minds, domestic and otherwise. The knowledge base of the average member of Congress as to the questions involving United States troops in Okinawa is very, very low. The knowledge base is virtually non-existent. Even in the Armed Services Committee themselves, it's one of many, many issues, quote unquote, that are out there, and in some respects, the presentation of the ongoing dialogue says, well, hasn't that already been solved? Well, no, it hasn't been solved. The latest iteration of all of this is that the government of Japan would pay to have the United States troops leave Okinawa, and they would go to Guam. This is another, without going into all of the details of that, but it's another way of saying, isn't this some way for us to pretend that we've solved this issue and that it will suddenly go away? It isn't going to go away. There is no logical way for United States Marines and families in particular. And parenthetically, I need to add here, when this issue first arose, especially where the United States Marine Corps was concerned, the issue of families and Marines was not necessarily the principal focus. But with the ending of the draft in the United States, in which young men at the time were drafted into the armed forces, with the advent of an all-voluntary military, including the United States Marines, you recruited individuals, but you retained families. If you wanted to have a consistency of professionalism, of dedication, of commitment, a continuity of practical capabilities in your military, from top to bottom, you needed to take into account the quality of life issue, that is to say families, where people lived, what kind of schooling were they going to get, what kind of atmosphere were they going to live in. Those became very, very important. And so as a result, when we talked about military in Okinawa, particularly with the Marines, you had to speak more and more about married Marines. You had to speak about married Marines with children. You had to talk about, had to take into account where people were being stationed and what kind of context they found themselves in. So the issue of resolving the question of the deployment of Marines in Okinawa became even more acute when you put the human factor into that equation. And so what came up was, well, the government of Japan's going to pay for it. And how's that going to work? Well, there's going to be this big loan of money in the billions of dollars, and we'll relocate thousands of families to Guam, and that will become a military version, a jumping off point, if you will, for the positioning of the United States military in the Asia Pacific region. The only problem with all that is it doesn't work on any level, and never did, and won't. Is that clear enough? That it became a convenient way to say, well, this is all getting resolved. I remember asking at one point an assistant secretary of defense, well, what's the interest rate on the loan? And the assistant secretary was dumbfounded because they hadn't gone into even that. I said, what are you talking about? What this was a stimulus program of the Japanese government in the wake of the a worldwide crash and recession that took place worldwide. And I thought to myself, and I said, I'm not telling you something that they don't know in Washington, because my whole approach and government officials both in Japan and in the Pentagon in the United States and in the State Department know very well, because I had this position from the beginning and said so, was that it not only wouldn't work, there's no infrastructure in Guam. There's not, you don't have the water, you don't have the sewers, you don't have the training capacity, you don't have the harbor, you don't have the housing capacity, you don't have the workforce. It's a small place. It's a wonderful people. I served on the Armed Services Committee with the delegate from Guam in the Congress who served on the Armed Services Committee with me. Very fine people. There is there's Anderson Air Force Base there. There is a case to be made tactically and strategically for location of troops to some degree in Guam, but only on a very limited basis. There's no training facilities, for example. Not to the degree necessary for a modern 21st century United States Marine Corps and Navy, for that matter. And what the proposal of the Japanese government was, essentially, it was not doing anything for us at all. It was to essentially put Japanese construction companies back to work. They were supposedly going to build facilities, family facilities and so on in Okinawa, then leave, ostensibly. And then all of the maintenance and the management of the facilities, all the operational expenses would then fall to the United States. Well, they were going to bring Japanese corporations in to do it, Japanese banks to do it. The workforce in Guam is not sufficient to be able to do it, so they were going to send out recruiters from Guam to the Philippines and to other areas of South Asia to recruit workers who would be brought in, put in some kind of huts or barracks of some kind, put them to work essentially at wage slave rates, and then and pay the government of Guam, by the way, a bounty of $1,000 a head for every foreign worker that they brought in. And then the United States would be stuck with whatever was left. And that was supposed to solve the problem. Well, it never happened. They can't do the environmental impact statements. There's no training facilities. They keep arguing about it. There's been about 5 different governments, maybe 10 in Japan since that time. It was never going to be adequate for the United States military, especially for the Marines, in any way, shape, or form. And so I proposed at that time that the sensible thing to do, and I put it forward for your consideration today, is that you take the majority of those families and with the refocusing on Asia, Pacific area by the President of the United States, is that you bring them to Hawaii. Now, the reason that you can do that is that we already have, as a result of work that I did in the Congress in the 1990s, provide for the quality of life issues that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks. That is to say, we build military family housing here that's second to none anywhere in the world, and we build it across the United States, now second to none anywhere in the world, as a result of a public-private venture partnership that we established with private enterprise to build, maintain, and manage military housing on military bases here in the state of Hawaii and elsewhere throughout the United States. I invite any of you, I can tell you today, that if any of you left this conference, you could be taken to a military housing without any notice, and you would find people there who are in the finest housing they have ever had as a member of the United States military, and who will tell you so. We've built thousands of units already. We can do it. In this sense, I want to emphasize to you that the United States military is not imposing itself in Okinawa. The United States military is a creature of the Constitution of the United States. The United States military takes its orders from civilian authority. It is there on the basis of the U.S.-Japan treaty, and this is a political decision as much as it is a military decision with regard to strategic interests or tactical deployment. So the United States military then is seeking in the Asia Pacific to be, as was announced most recently by the Pacific Command, and I quote directly, geographically distributed, operationally focused, and politically sustainable. My proposition to you today for your consideration is, if we want to have the U.S.-Japan treaty to be working sensibly, if we want to have a relationship between the Japanese people, by the people of Okinawa more particularly, and the people of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region, that is geographically distributed, operationally focused, and politically sustainable, then we need to say that to the degree families, troops will be removed from Okinawa, the overwhelming majority of them should come to Hawaii, and that can be done starting today. Presently, the United States military projects a timeline of 2020 for the anticipated move of just under 5,000 Marines to Guam. That isn't going to work. I mean, you could do it. You can force them to go there, but it will just be horrendously expensive. It will be a disaster in terms of morale and the social and economic strains that will take place as a result. Of course, there needs to be a presence in Guam, but it needs to be thought of much more calculatedly in terms of what is absolutely necessary there. We have the training capacity here in Hawaii at Pohakaloa on the Big Island for a modern 21st century training capacity for Marines and for the Air Force and Army. So it's geographically distributed in a sensible way that reflects the current capabilities of the United States military. It's important to emphasize the timeline and the number of Marines was a projection. When I say 4,700 to 5,000 Marines on Guam, this was a projection only. It's not finalized. Nothing is ever finalized with this because everybody is hedging their bets. This isn't a criticism, it's a critique. I'm not casting aspersions on anybody or indicating that there's some kind of subterranean plot in any of this. Everything that's done every day seems like a good idea at the time in all of this, except it never gets anywhere. And I believe that we cannot continue on this path. It's unsustainable politically in Okinawa. It will be a constant source of irritation and division with the government of Japan. And it resolves nothing in terms of the capabilities of the United States military to be able to carry out its strategic mission in the Asia-Pacific region if we cannot resolve this issue satisfactorily among everybody. So I'm thinking that the way to do that is to admit that the principal training facility that's available to us right now without major expense exists right here in Hawaii at Pohakaloa, and that the capacity to house in a sensible, reasonable, cost-effective way that enhances the quality of life for military families and the serving military, active duty military that are part of these families all exists here in Hawaii right now. This is dependent, and I think this is the position of the Pacific Command too. Obviously, I'm not speaking for them, but I think it should be the position of the United States as well. The solution to this resolution, rather, is entirely dependent on ongoing coordination with the government of Japan, the government of the United States, Okinawa, and Hawaii. Believe me, I can work this out with. I'm good friends with everybody in Okinawa, am I not? And If I was born again, I think it'd be born Okinawan. I'm short enough. Am I right? I've been told that over and over again. I know I could run a good campaign in Okinawa because I could look everybody eye to eye, you see, and be able to pitch for those votes. But I think that we can do that, and I want to close then I think that's the sensible way of doing it, is to stop the constant fending off of one another in terms of trying to solve everybody's problem but the one that is the principal focus, which is the continued stationing of Marines in outsized numbers and concentrated in Okinawa, and we want to get that solved. Right here is something that I am taking to Washington. I've been presenting here. I could show you right now. This I'll just haul this out real quick. Right there, you can't see it from where you are, but right there is several hundred housing units right now. We could build several hundred units for United States Marines right now with net zero energy. They'd be the most green communities on the face of the earth. We could do it in Hawaii. I could get started on Monday. And be able to do this. I have a standing offer from landowners on Oahu right now to be able to come to a public-private venture agreement where private enterprise would come in and we could build a community for United States military if they were redeployed from Okinawa. I could start on Monday and get the negotiations done and start getting it done right here in Hawaii. We could take 2,500 families here, I think, right away, and happy to have them. We can take the necessary improvements that need to be done on at our existing training ranges here in Hawaii to be able to meet the training needs. I think we can resolve this issue then. I don't think, as I said, that necessarily we're going to solve everything. Not everybody's political interests will be taken care of, but as they see it. But if we're talking about and then want to resolve what we're talking about, then we have to admit two or three things, and I'll close with this. That you cannot continue to have the war in the Pacific, the Second World War, continue in Okinawa and nowhere else. It's not right. It's not fair. It's not needed. The Berlin Wall has come down. The Berlin Wall has come down. The Soviet Union is no more. There's been a revolution in China and elsewhere. The entire world has changed. And yet we continue to have the residue of the final battle of World War II and the occupation of Japan continue in its present form in Okinawa. It's politically unsustainable in Japan. I'm not criticizing. I hope everybody understands it. This is not a criticism of one side or the other in this. In fact, we shouldn't be having sides on this. It shouldn't exist. This is a challenge to the government of Japan, a challenge to the government of Okinawa, a challenge to the people of Japan, and it's a challenge to the government and people of the United States. We need to sit down once and for all with the idea that we will resolve this question. Not keep arguing about how long we continue to have people in our armed forces in Okinawa when it is not sustainable politically or otherwise, but rather how do we resolve the issue? My point simply is that here in Hawaii, and I think based on my experience in the Armed Services Committee and my capacity now as governor of Hawaii, I think we have a clear understanding of the military necessities. I think we have a clear understanding of what the possibilities for helping to resolve the issues are here in Hawaii in terms of housing, in terms of logistics, in terms of coordination with the United States military. I don't think there is a better coordinated civilian military context anywhere in the United States or in the world than there is in Hawaii between the United States military and the people of Hawaii. We have an ongoing positive relationship. We have a capacity to to be able to respond to this situation, I think, with infrastructure physically and an infrastructure psychologically, emotionally, in the human context, that is as good or better than any place you can find in the world. We have a history with the people of Okinawa and Hawaii that is unique. The Uchinanchu phenomenon is manifest in all of the flags here. I was at the Uchinanchu. Some of you know I was pleased and privileged to be in the company of some of the people in this room at the Uchinanchu festival recently. I was honored to be asked. I think I was the only foreign speaker when the governor made his keynote address at the stadium. Was asked to speak on behalf of those who have welcomed the Uchinanchu diaspora rather, of Okinawans throughout the world. And I was very, very happy to be able to do that. So my point here is I think we have a unique possibility here in Hawaii of bringing this decades-long challenge to a successful conclusion for all concerned. And I would like to say then that to the degree and extent that this administration, the Abercrombie administration, can be helpful in that regard, can be a catalyst in that regard, can be a vehicle for that resolution, you can count on me to give every effort to it. Thank you very, very much. Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you, Governor. Another big hand for the Governor. Thank you very much.